your area. Please do so. All right, everybody have a good Shana Tova. Please be seated. Please be seated. Shana Tova, everybody. What have I started? Please have your seats. Shana Tova. Please be seated. It's time for the rabbi to give his Rosh Hashana address. And as I begin my 5779 message to you, the first message of many on the high holidays, I will begin with the cantor's permission with the song. Thank you. Shalom, shalom, you'll find shalom, the nicest greeting you know. It means bonjour, salut, and skol, and twice as much as hello. It means a million lovely things, like peace be yours, welcome home. And even when you say goodbye with shalom. It's a very useful word. It can get you through the day. All you really need to know, you can hardly go wrong. This is your home as long as you say shalom, the nicest greeting I know. Shalom means twice as much as hello. It means a million lovely things, like peace be yours, welcome home. And even when you say goodbye, if your voice has I don't want to go in it, say goodbye with a little hello in it, and say goodbye with shalom. So you're all sitting there wondering, why is this Meshuggah singing while he's supposed to be talking? Am I right? What's he singing a ditty for? Some things just come together in strange ways. You see, when my brothers and I did concerts with our mother and our father of blessed memory, Zichrono Livracha, this was the song that my mother loved the most. At the last concert we did together, this was the song my mother sang, and she loved it so, so very much. The reason my mother loved this song was not because her maiden name was the same as the name of the composer of the music and the lyrics, Jerry Herman, because I doubt that she actually even knew that. It was not also because her nickname that everyone called her was Honey, and the song comes from the Broadway play Milk and Honey. It was because she loved the melody, but most of all, she was inspired by the meaning of the lyrics. Furthermore, shalom was a word that was in one of the two most used phrases in our home. The first was shalom bayit, or peace in our home. The other was, what's for supper? But I digress. Getting back to shalom, like the song says, it truly is an amazing word. In Hebrew, the shoresh, the root of the shalom, is shin lamed mem sofit, pronounced shalem. That word means complete. So why does the word for peace come from the word complete? God created an incomplete world, a world that is in constant struggle to be completed. As an example, nature is always erupting with something. A good illustration is what is going on in Hawaii with the volcano. The Big Island is getting even bigger, becoming more complete. As for humans, look at us, look at us. We look around for partners to spend our lives with, to help us feel more complete. That we want to have children and grandchildren. With each birth, we feel even more complete. And we feel more complete when we feel more at peace and more shalom when we are together with each other. It is very interesting that the Torah describes how God tries to complete creation by separating things. Day from night, heaven from earth, water from dry land. Darwin described evolution in much the same way. Organisms evolve by separating from one state of being and morphing into something very different. Ironically, to achieve completeness, everything must be in a state of constant tension. As a result, shalom, true peace, seems to be unachievable, idealistic. Yet, is it realistic? I'm not sure. Philosophically, does anyone really know what true shalom looks like? I can tell you one thing. While growing up in my house, my mother and father insisted on instilling the notion of shalom bayit into the three brothers and me every single day. But looking back, I don't remember them ever telling us what it meant. All they said is that, above all else, we must always work hard to keep shalom bayit. We must always think about not what the other person will think, but how the other person will feel after our words leave our lips. This is a lesson my brothers and I have never forgotten, and I believe it's the most important thing we've ever learned. To this day, my brothers and I get on a conference call to talk once every week. I've told you before, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we drop everything, we dial in, and we join this conference call. These calls last about 15 minutes, so we can see if everything is okay. We want to know if everything's okay with each other and with our families. We do it, frankly, because we love each other. We do it to respect the teachings of our parents about shalom bayit. Of course, being two cantors and two rabbis, we almost always discuss religion and being citizens of the United States and Jews. We talk about politics here and in Israel. Other than our love and concern for our families, it's rare that we all agree on anything else. We discuss Democrats and Republicans, Trump, Netanyahu, and those other emotional topics that can drive sane people to the brink of insanity. For us, shalom bayit guides our conversations. We discuss every issue of the day without judging each other. Sure, we might get emotional, we might even get loud, but since it was drilled into our heads, since we were babies to keep shalom bayit, there was never a time when any one of us ever hung up the phone or walked away in anger over a disagreement. We fully listened, and we heard what each had to say. We never ended a discussion with, I don't want to talk about it anymore. We always discussed our points of view until each one of us was done talking, not when one of us was done listening. A few weeks ago, many of you know, I attended a stimulating AIPAC rabbinic symposium in Washington, D.C. At that gathering, something very important hit me as I attended a session led by New York Times op-ed columnist Bret Stephens, who I found to be a very wise man. His session was entitled, and that's why I attended it, Americanism in the Age of Trump. That's why I attended that session. It seemed very interesting to me. What am I going to learn? My takeaway from this session were these very important words. When one is arguing and when one is disagreeing, instead of yelling, arguing, or calling each other names, if we just listen to each other, just listen, we should all be able to say these following words. I can see that. I can see that. That's all. Sounds like Shalom Bayit to me. How about you? Shalom Bayit is not something we hear much about anymore. After how I see families tear themselves apart over meaningless nonsense, I have come to really appreciate how special people my parents had to be. I cannot relate to my brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, parents and children who are always at each other's throats or refusing to speak to each other, not to mention divorces, estrangements that occur just because of their feelings over political differences. How sad it is that lifelong friends break up over these arguments. I'm seeing it every day. While what I'm about to say is meant to be a generalization, it actually is true, mostly. If some people who live in the Boston to Washington or Frisco to LA megalopolis says, I love Trump, at a minimum, that person is sure to get ostracized. If someone is in the interior of the US says, I hate Trump, that person will be treated just as badly. The thing is, from both sides, would take the time to listen to each other. Why the other person believes what they believe, it is amazing that they might even learn from each other. While I do not recall things being this bad, this kind of divisiveness, though, was true ever since I can remember as a child. I can actually remember Eisenhower. I was a baby, but I remember Eisenhower when he was president, and then President Lyndon Johnson was a divisive figure when he took over after President John Kennedy was assassinated. Every day, I remember as a child seeing the news, even at that young age, we saw the reports of the ever-growing Vietnam War. American soldier body count was on the rise, and President Johnson became more and more disliked at that time. When we try to list the many good things Bill Clinton did as a president, the time he spent in the Oval Office with that Jewish girl from San Francisco redirects our attention. His legacy is that he was impeached. The secret to keeping everything in perspective is to remember Shalom Bayit. Remember that everyone has the right to their own opinion. Differences of opinion are no reason to break up families and friendships. If it was, we would all eventually wind up alone and by ourselves. This reminds me of a parable told by Eli Wiesel, Zichrono Livracha. Man complained to God, "You have no idea how hard it is to be human, to live a life darkened by suffering and despair in a world filled with violence and destruction, to fear death, and to worry that nothing we do or create or dream matters. You have no idea how hard it is to be human." And then God responded, "You think it's easy to be God? I have a whole universe to run, a whole universe demanding constant vigilance. You think you could do that?" "I'll tell you what," suggested the man. "Let's switch places. For just one moment. For just one moment, you be man and I'll be God. And that way we'll see who has it harder." "For just a moment," God said. Okay, he agreed. So man and God switched places. Man sat upon God's throne and God descended to earth. After one moment passed, God looked up and said, "Okay, time to switch back." But man refused. Man refused to give up the throne of God. This is how the parable ends. If we look at our behavior with others, this is exactly how society is behaving today. We all think that we're right. We all think we have the answers. And God forbid anyone should disagree with us. That person needs to be silenced, punished, or exiled. We act like we are God and we are the only one that is right. Ironically, even with our complex God, we do not consider much of anything sacred anymore. What about love of country? Is that sacred? The answer is anything but. As we already said, we have transformed engaging in political conversations into a toxic pit. We seem to love winning an argument about our country more than we love our country. Perhaps it's because we do not welcome God into our lives. Perhaps we are not thinking about peace, about Shalom Bayit. Is belief in religion sacred? The answer to that is not at all for most people, unless that it is to be used for most others. The Jewish people have become more and more divided, and the divide is growing wider every day. Even the Jewish state of Israel, where our kids told us moments ago where they visited, Jewish men and women cannot gather and pray together wherever they want, in any way that they want. Arguments about who is a Jew, who represents authentic Judaism, who can marry and who is a Jewish enough to marry that person, who is Jewish enough to perform conversions. Is that Shalom Bayit? Where is Shalom Bayit? What about families? What is sacred about our families? Research coming out of several esteemed universities report that North American children, when not in school, spend about 10 hours a week interacting with their family, but more than 30 hours a week on social media. Millennial-age parents check in to their smartphones before they check in with the person sleeping next to them or with their children who are standing right next to them. Is the family sacred? Has God been replaced by technology? Is there Shalom Bayit? So I must ask, if those things are not sacred, what is? While it seems that nothing is sacred anymore, I cannot accept that. True, you and I are a result of the natural biological drive to procreate. But is the universe and everything in it simply something that happened by accident? Is there no possibility that it was created for a sacred purpose by a higher authority? More and more people believe that the universe is a living organism that is naturally occurring phenomena and that there is no higher authority. The universe was always here and always will be. They believe that humans exist for the same reason that the solar system or the universe exists, for the same reason vegetation exists, for the same reason the other animals exist, because that's how nature works. God, religion, humanism, and even legal systems are inventions of humans that were created to support our narcissistic and egotistical drives and instincts. We keep hearing that we should live and let live, just like the rest of the animal kingdom does. We don't need laws, police, courts, jails, military, flags, or groups with which to identify. The notion that something should be sacred is made from a whole cloth. Shalom Bayit. With this model, how can anyone achieve Shalom Bayit? The answer, of course, is that by removing all these constraints that were invented to control us, a naturally occurring peace will happen by all itself. No more crime, no more arguments, no more wars, no more hunger, and everyone will live happily ever after. So I fully admit that religion, laws, and group identification have been the source of evil acts throughout history. It is important to note that they do more to create a sense of order and a pathway to good, a good life, than if they did not exist. While people abuse them to gain power, money, and to commit evil, this should not be a surprise. Our tradition warns us that this can and it will happen. We are also taught that the benefits significantly outweigh the negatives, and that's why Torah gives us mitzvot, not to control us, but to help us to live more complete lives. Now, while most people think a mitzvah is a good deed, to quote the words from another Broadway show, it ain't necessarily so. You should not kill, steal, covet. While those are mitzvot, they are certainly not considered good deeds. Mitzvot are laws, they're commandments from God. Jews are taught that mitzvot are the basic fabric we need to follow to build complete lives for ourselves and for our civilization. By following mitzvot, we can achieve Shalom Bayit. As for identifying with groups, the Torah broke Israel into 12 tribes, each named for an offspring of Yaakov. It also makes sure that we have a system of leadership, a system to codify laws, a system of enforcement, and courts that rule honestly and blindly. That said, the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, goes out of its way to highlight the weaknesses in the people, the system it describes. Everyone described in the Tanakh, without exception, has faults, some more pronounced than others. When we talk about our politicians of today, most of the kings and queens described in the Tanakh did horrible things. King Saul sent his army to kill David, but failed. King David sent the husband of the woman he loved to war to be killed and succeeded. King Solomon allowed idol worship, had 1,000 wives, many not from the house of Israel, and countless concubines. Who can forget the evil queen Jezebel, wife of King Ahab, who persecuted the prophets? When we learn Tanakh or Talmud, the one thing that stands out is that there's no such thing as fairness, perfection, utopia, and most of all, nothing is complete. While we strive for all that, there's no promise that it is something that we will be given. I realize Judaism does teach that the Mashiach will come and bring all that someday, but when is that going to happen? In the meantime, what do we do until that happens? The answer comes from how we pursue achieving Shalom Bayit. We Jews must accept that we alone have been chosen by God to be a kingdom of priests, a light unto nations. It is up to us to make the world a little bit better than the way we found it. It is up to us to work hard to find Shalom Bayit, and the best way to do that is to always work hard to achieve Shalom. Should we not all agree that breaking up families and friendships over who is president should be, or who should be president, or could have been president is no way to make the world a little better than we found it? Should we not agree that working to achieve Shalom Bayit is a much better alternative? Yes, knowing how important it is to achieve Shalom Bayit is why my mother loved that song so much. My parents lived their lives with smiles on their faces, loving to laugh and always looking for what was funny in the world and not fighting about what is wrong with it. If my 3 brothers and I learned anything from our parents, we learned that laughter is the shortest distance to Shalom Bayit. So the next time we sit with our friends or families or open up our Facebook or Twitter accounts and someone brings up a post of politics, before we open our mouths, let's just think of a word: Shalom. Before we lose our temper, let us think of a word: Shalom. There's no requirement to agree. There is none. We're not always going to agree with each other. But I think we're duty-bound to at least remain civil. I can see that, can't you? Shalom, the nicest greeting I know. Shalom means twice as much as hello. It means a million lovely things, like peace be yours, welcome home. And even when you say goodbye, if your voice has I don't want to go in it, say goodbye with a little hello in it, and say goodbye with Shalom. Shana Tova. This time it's my honor and privilege to invite Adele Labarsky for some announcements.